Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. In case this is your first time at Shop Talk, welcome. If this is more than your first time, most of you are still welcome. The restraining orders are we're still working all the details out, so we haven't gotten all those in place yet. So in the meantime, you're still welcome.
We couldn't spell Anders' name correctly, apparently.
I know
The
it's
lawyers the lawyers are sticklers about that.
yes. Anders is probably only like the fourth person I would put a restraining order on. I would on the restraining order, it would be more like you're only allowed to come within 25 yards of me if you have an interesting story to tell, and then he'd constantly be around. So, all right. If this is your first time, welcome to Shop Talk. Basically, it's Monday. It's the evening, at least on the East Coast. Rollback transaction. Yeah, we're just gonna start all this over. That cold opening did not work out very well, so we're just gonna try it over again. So this is Monday. It is usually evening. It is the day after daylight savings time. I will spare you my annual rant about daylight savings time. So you're all welcome for that. But we're here to kick back. We've got some questions. We had some questions come in through email, and I'm just looking up at the screen at what's getting presented to you folks and waiting for the email address to pop up so that I can say, if you have any questions, you actually can send us an email. And then we have a chance to prepare a little bit, and then we don't sound quite as foolish as, well, if you just throw it right at us. There we go. Shoptalk@tripass.org. That is the actual email address that a human, or at least me, I will possibly respond to. So you can check that out. Nobody likes daylight savings time. I agree. I fully agree. Anders, well, okay. Anders, now you'd understand why we get the restraining order. You're the guy who likes daylight savings time. We just can't have that. Okay. So, we've got a few topics for tonight. Spring for more so you just want us to keep moving forward 1 hour each half year, and then every 12 years or so we're going to balance back out. We'll just have an extra day. Actually, we'll have lost a full day. You are stealing days from my life. Over a 12-year period, you steal a full day from my life. Do away with time zones.
Okay, so
I'm okay with doing away with time zones because we do have Eastern Standard Time, which is the standard time. So
I
just everybody used Eastern Standard. It's the standard. Go ahead, Mike.
all right, so on this topic, I know we're still doing our intro, but this is so random, but I saw some video about how there's leap years, but like those aren't even exact, and that there's a correction every 100 years.
Yeah, sure. You have the rules around leap years where it's every 4 years, except if the year ends in two zeros, except if it's every 400 years. So that's why 2000 was a leap year, but 1900 was not. And I may
Okay,
even have,
you're on top of it. I was like shocked when I saw this. I mean, like,
and then we
that's,
have we have leap seconds to kind of match up with, oh well, sometimes the earth moves faster or slower, and so we kind of need to jump a second because the earth spinning isn't quite as fast as it was 100 years ago.
it is
um
getting old. Yeah.
it's slowing down, getting a little creaky in the bones. After a few billion years, that happens to everyone. So we have questions. And actually, one of our questioners, one of our interrogators, is in chat. And so I'm going to jump into that after I do my shameless promotion. So, shameless promotion time. SQL Saturday Raleigh. SQL Saturday Raleigh is coming up on May the 17th of 2025. It is an in-person event. It will be hosted at Duke Health. Thank you to Mike for making that happen. I'm even going to share my screen, and we're going to not share with audio because that sounds like a scary idea right there. But SQL Saturday 2025 is number 1111. If you're not here for SQL Saturday number 1111, I don't know what you're doing.
It's a palindrome.
It is both palindromic and it's all the same number. It's I don't think 1111 is a prime number, but I'd have to double check. Um, I don't have my Civ of Aristhamus sitting around right now. Once in a while, they do a fraction of a second at some random day. Yeah, those are that's even more than the leap second that I was talking about. Yes. So every once in a while, you'll get like a tenth of a second change. But we do have a capacity limit because there are only so many people that the fire marshal will allow us to jam into one room. So sign up, register. If you want to be a speaker, I will call out that the call for speakers is currently open. It is open until the end of this month. That means you have dozens of days, well, dozen plus days to get in your submission. It is March 10th right now. So you have approximately 21 days in which to do it, which is more than a dozen. So just click that button, type some stuff into the screen that appears. That stuff should probably be legible so that and somewhat comprehensible so that we can adjudicate whether we want that session or not. And then we'll select some sessions and we'll put together a schedule and it's going to be really neat. So you should probably do that. And that way we'll have speakers. Speakers are very important for an event. We found that out over the years. It turns out when you have an event with no speakers, everybody just sits around awkwardly, wondering what's going to happen, and nothing actually happens, and then people walk away, and they don't understand that it's an avant-garde take on the tragedy of the human soul, in which we're all waiting. We're all waiting for something to happen, but you have to be the one to make it happen. And as a result, that's why we need speakers, and that's why you should be a speaker. So that's my pitch
And
for why you
oh,
should
and
be a speaker.
also, if we have Randy's Pizza, then we can at least chew on that for 45 minutes and then leave.
It would take about 45 minutes to chew sufficiently for you to be able to swallow that pizza. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of that pizza chain or the store.
Tea is happening tonight.
Yeah. So
Yeah, spill the tea, Raleigh Durham area. Randy's hot take.
I'm not a big fan of them. They're I don't know. I don't like their style. That means we're never going to get a sponsorship from them. But what I will say is that you should definitely submit for SQL Saturday Raleigh as a speaker, unless your name is Godot. If your name is Godot, we're not selecting you. Anders says, "You don't think I could fill a whole day?" I actually do think you could fill a whole day. The one session, SQL Planes, Guns, and Cars. I would admittedly go to that session. I would probably try to create that session. I should probably submit that as a session title somewhere. You have to pick the right place, like Portland, Oregon. Because I'm sure it would get selected there. I do want to
Well,
point out, Redgate is an official sponsor. So congratulations, Redgate, for making the brilliant decision to send us money. And so with that, there's one more thing I do want to mention. Brand Ozar's Precon. I had this up on the screen for a little bit, but you too can come to someplace. Dallas would actually be a good place to submit that session. But you too can come and listen to Brent Ozar try to make your cloud database faster or maybe cheaper. Maybe one of the two. Pick one, at most one. But that is currently available. Now, the price, if you have not signed up for it already, it is up to $199. So you missed your chance at the lower price, but it's still a perfectly reasonable price for a full day training with Brent, learning about cloud database stuff. And frankly, a lot of the stuff that he's going to talk about, I mean, it's first responder kit, assessing bottlenecks, index and query tuning, and that kind of thing. And frankly, for a lot of this, that's going to work just as well on premises. Dallas, I could fly in on my jet with a Lambo in the back carrying multiple guns and talking about sequel. I'm pretty sure that was a Chuck Norris movie. I think that was the premise of Invasion
Delta
USA.
Force, Invasion USA.
That would be the double Uzi and denim jacket. Um, so anyhow, that's my pitch for SQL Saturday Raleigh. So come check that out. It will happen. We promise this time. This,
Wait, legitimate has is that Anders? Has he? I'm not on Twitch, but did he submit? Because he's really. I mean, like I make jokes and tease him, but he's amazing. Like he'd be great.
Yeah, Anders, as I recall, we did goad him into submitting last time around. So we did get him to submit a session, as I recall. I'm double checking.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well, I'm just saying, encouraging it, and
Oh,
I'm going to be
absolutely.
encouraged. I have a big meeting tomorrow. You're going to be competing with Duke folks too, because I have at least two or three people that are going to probably submit from Duke.
Excellent. So yeah, we've got Anders. Anders is in our clutches now. We actually have a pretty good number of speaker submissions. So that's fairly neat. And it does have planes in it. That's right. Yes, Anders did his that session on from flying to SQL, one accidental DBA's journey. So we'll see if we select it. We'll find out. I mean, it probably will. Just pro spoilers. It's probably getting selected because it has planes in it. All
Well,
right,
and he's got the bias of having alphabetically, ascending A.
that is true. That is true. If you were like Zebediah, then by the time people get to you, sorry, we're all full. Zed's got to be that much better than everybody else just to get selected. I'll be there either way. I'll just take a room and start speaking in the room. People will come by. This must be a
Preach.
session room. Like, no, this is just Anders. He's just standing there speaking.
He's a sequel messiah. He's just preaching.
He's got a soapbox and everything. All right. So that was our pitch. That was our very extended come and sign up for SQL Saturday Raleigh session pitch. And it's probably not going to get any better. As we get closer to the event, it's not going to get any better than that. So that's why I'm trying to get you to sign up now so that my later pitches, which are going to be significantly decreasing in quality of pitch, we got to drag you in while we can. That's the idea. So let's talk stand up SQL. Rob Volk would do really well at that. Question from a user. Question from friend of the show who is in our chat. I won't call out, but I currently use PowerShell scripts to pull data from source APIs for my company's data pipelines. Our BI department is nascent. And I appreciate the use of the word nascent there. I appreciate that. Thus, our scripts are
New,
mostly just pulling data and loading it into a tabular format in SQL Server. We don't really do much in the way of transformation, which has caused issues with large memory grants and implicit conversions in our SQL Server. I'm curious if PowerShell is an appropriate or even adequate tool for performing transformations. And if not, what other options are there? We're trying to keep as much of the processing as possible outside of SQL Server to reduce licensing costs. So that's the setup, that's the premise. And there is an immediate answer. There are some longer answers. And I think I'll start with the immediate answer. And then, maybe Mike will even be able to say a word or two in between breaths for me. We'll find out. We'll find out when I actually do breathe. But immediate answer is yeah, PowerShell is fine for performing transformations. I don't know that that would be the language I personally would choose. Anders says no, use anything else. Yeah, I don't know if it would be the language that I would choose, but I will say you can use .NET for performing this sort of transformation work, and .NET does include C Sharp, PowerShell, and the best language of all, F Sharp,
sure,
and
yeah,
also VB.NET. But let's not go there. Let's not
it's
go there.
deprecated.
It is, yeah. So you probably don't want to use that. But most of the types of operations that you would do, you can still do that in PowerShell. I think some of the work is not as pretty. There's some clunkiness in assembly referencing and calling methods that isn't as good, but it's certainly doable. So why reinvent the wheel when there are companies making a living creating tools to do it? Which is a good point. You do have multiple tools in this process for transformation. With SQL Server, you do get SQL Server integration services. Now that does do processing on your SQL Server instance or on another machine where you have to license it. So this may not be a perfectly viable answer. Um, there are other tools, Informatica, Ab Initio, etc. And that again, you license it, it can get kind of expensive, but these are tools that are specifically meant for ETL processing. They're specifically meant for this sort of transformation. Um, if you really need to keep your transformations off of your main machines, then yeah, you could write custom code, custom .NET code or Java code or Python code, whatever language your developers are most comfortable with. You can do that, and depending on your data sizes, it may work perfectly fine. Like, oh, it's a million rows. Yeah, I can load that into a reasonable laptop and running Python and do data transformations on that, and they're all in-memory transformations, and it works okay. And then I can write the results out to SQL Server. If we're talking 100 million or a billion rows, that's a little tougher. And for that, I would probably look at more comprehensive tooling. There is
Yeah.
Apache Airflow, and maybe I should drop a few
I was
links.
about to say airflow. Yeah.
Yeah, Airflow is a really great way of um, authoring, scheduling, and monitoring workflows. That's from their website, and this is a Python based. It's a library and an application you can install, and the workflows are little. There's a bit of drag and drop, so it's not incredibly difficult to get started with, and does work really well for orchestration. So ETL and ELT. And by the way, in case anybody's unfamiliar with the difference between these two, ETL, extract, so you're taking data out from a source system. Transform, usually you're transforming in your ETL tool versus your source system or your destination system. And then you're loading the transformed results into your destination system. So your transformations are happening usually on compute that is outside of your databases.
Right.
ELT is you extract data from a source system, load it into that destination system, and then transform in the destination system. ELT has actually become the more popular approach. And then there are a couple of variants. There's ETLT, which realistically is what most people do is you extract, you do some transforming, you load it, and you do a little bit more transforming. That is probably the most common pattern, even if people will call it ETL or ELT. Like, yeah, you're kind of doing both. Um, then you could get wilder in how you describe things, but yeah, if you're thinking about I'm loading data from a relational system, a transactional processing system running SQL Server into a warehouse running SQL Server, I would do a lot of the initial transformation in my SQL queries on the source system. If you know that you need to do things that SQL Server can do well, like converting data types, like doing checks, replacing nulls with something else, create stored procedures or create views or create something that lives in your database that just preps that work for you. Because, yeah, you could do that in your .NET code or in your Java code or Python code or in your Airflow workflow or something. But, you know, for those sorts of operations, Anders asks on the source, even if it's a busy OLTP system, yeah, I mean, unless you're constantly pushing at the very edge, like if you're at the edge of your OLTP system, okay, yeah,
I
I,
think
I
it's
can understand. But
that's different. That's kind of like Spark and like real time messaging system, right?
well, I would say thinking about it more from the standpoint of you don't want to overwhelm that transactional processing system. But yeah, if you're doing very heavy transformations and it's a really busy system, okay, I'll give you that. But if I've set up read committed snapshot isolation, if I'm not blocking anybody, and if I have resources available on that SQL Server instance, I'd rather just use that because we have the tooling, we have the capabilities, and then I can load that into my destination warehouse and I can transform there. So, um, I just tend to do it on whatever system has the most excess power at the time to process what happens. And I think that's perfectly fair. And frankly, this is why ELT has become such a popular pattern, is
Right.
because what we found is, to Andrew's point, the source system usually is very busy. The destination warehouse is usually a lot less busy, especially when it's time to load data. So I'll take data, I'll extract data out, and I'll do it without a lot of overhead. So this is where I was saying, if you're gonna if all you're doing is casting, is nulls, I'm joining tables, a few tables together, doing stuff that you would already do on a transactional processing system, I have zero qualms about doing that in the source system. If we're talking about lookups, if we're talking about expensive queries, expensive deduplication processes, or other things that would add a lot to the cost of the query locally on the source system, okay, we can debate. Maybe that shouldn't be there, and instead take it, load it into the warehouse, the destination system, and do transforms. So in general, I would recommend probably taking advantage of SQL Server. And I understand the desire to limit the amount of compute because hey, we want to limit the licensing as uh, the explicit statement is in here. Reduce licensing costs. I think probably the uh, main advice that I would give is optimize the transformations, optimize the processing. Like in this case, I saw in the question large memory grants, implicit conversions in SQL Server. Those are fixable. So uh, that would be something that I would rather try to fix the queries than try to offload all of that processing elsewhere. Because fixing the queries or fixing the structure of that ETL process or ELT process is probably going to be a bit easier than rewriting everything to transform in someplace else. Um, what licensing costs, unless you need to spin up a new SQL server for it? Yeah, this might be, well, we currently have licensed 32 cores, and it'd be great if we could reduce that to 24 or 16 cores. Some Maybe something like that, or already pushing the server to its limit and want to cut back a little bit. So I could see that being the a possible answer. So long story short, the way that we see things moving, and this is not just a SQL Server thing. In the modern day let's try that again. In the modern data warehousing world, where we think about Databricks, where we think Microsoft Fabric, where we're thinking about Snowflake, in these cases, what we're seeing is ELT. We're seeing extract from source system or mirror from a source system, load that data into our data lake or into our staging tables in a warehouse, and then
Mm.
transform that data into a structure that makes sense for our end users. And
Right.
in the Databricks world, in the Fabric world, the lake houses of our data system, that's where we talk about bronze, silver, gold, or raw, refined, curated, or however you want to talk about the
Right.
process of taking that raw data and restructuring it, reshaping it, extending it, enriching it, and making it usable for our business people, as well as aggregating, calculating, generating measurements, and simplifying the display and calculation of items for in reporting. And that kind of gives you your raw, refined, curated in those multiple steps. But all of that work is happening effectively in your destination compute. If it's in Databricks, your Databricks compute. If it's in Fabric, it's Fabric compute units. If it's in Snowflake, Snowflake compute is doing this work. So in all of those cases, the destination is doing that. If we're talking about a destination of a SQL Server, data warehouse in SQL Server, not even Azure SQL Data Warehouse or Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pools, but just strictly a SQL server that is set up for OLAP operations, ELT is still probably going to be a really solid pattern because that warehouse most likely has long stretches of time where it's not doing a lot of work. And for the data loading operations, we can take advantage of that compute. So, yeah, I guess I would mildly push back on the premise and
Mhm.
say it may actually be better to focus on uh, making those queries a little bit better, making sure that, yeah, if you have problems with your ETL query processing, work on optimizing that. But if there was an imperative that, oh, you absolutely have to get this processing out of the SQL Server instances, PowerShell is an acceptable answer. I would prefer almost any other .NET language over it. I would prefer C sharp and F sharp over PowerShell for this, definitely.
C sharp would be, I mean, hey, you sold me on F sharp, but C sharp would probably be more applicable for a larger team.
Yeah, C sharp is going to be probably the more likely answer. Um, but honestly, I think I for data people, I would sincerely ask you to look at F sharp. Um, I understand it's a bit of a meme with me at this point, but there's a reason that I've made it into one is because I think that the thought processes for data processing match really well with functional programming. And I'm not the only yokel who's thought it. That's literally the entire premise of Apache Spark, and actually, frankly, of Hadoop as well. Is functional programming techniques work really well for data processing. Okay, so Kevin still thinks
Can I
anybody.
say, can I say one thing too, like just as a, uh, without getting into the specifics, like there's also a, so the question was about like processing on SQL Server, and there might be some. You had a very valid case about there could be some specific instances where there maybe their license is going to end soon, or they can only have 12 cores, per budget, whatever. But there's also a cost for processing things in other places, right? So it might be a trade-off, right? Like, so is it free to do some of these processing elsewhere? Like maybe you have your own dedicated servers and you have, you know, you're not for profit and you have donated compute from a group. But I would just say there's that, like there's that pro and con of if you do compute off SQL Server because of cost, well, where are you doing your compute, and is that advantageous for you as well?
True. Yes, but SQL Server is a very expensive product. I mean, if you're licensing Enterprise Edition, that's what $7,000 per core. They're about. So it's a pretty expensive product compared to not using SQL Server and just deploying out an application like a Python app or a .NET app. So the question is, when you say ELT into SQL Server, would you literally drop JSON into SQL Server and parse it? I would say if that data came in JSON files, I would probably have a fairly narrow application that takes that file, gets it into a reasonable format, and then opens up a data reader into SQL Server and inserts that data. You could use SQL Server integration services for that task if you don't want to write that code yourself, because that's a pretty easy task for SSIS to deal with. Um, that's if your system actually is a series of JSON files. If your source system is a SQL Server, I wouldn't export it into JSON first and then import it later. I would probably just have your application open up a data reader, call the SQL query, call that stored procedure, read that view, even just run a regular query, and then write the results into your warehouse. I mean, alternatively, depending on how closely aligned these servers are, if they're in the same data center, if they're able to communicate with each other, you could even create a linked server or use Polybase to read the data from the source system, select it into staging tables in your warehouse server, and then do your processing from there without even having an application intermediary. So, to Andrew's point, it does depend. Do not suggest link servers. I'm not for anything major. No, I would not do a link server. If we were talking about a company that had a gigabyte of data and just wanted a warehouse, you might question, why do you want a warehouse for that? But if it's a very small amount of data, if it's something that doesn't update very frequently, I'm probably not building all the infrastructure around deploying applications and doing all the checks and everything, and just say, at that point, I might even just have your warehouse database be another database on the same instance, and then you don't need the link server. It's just go query this database. It's on the same instance. Um, Polybase, I mean, I know a guy who wrote a book on it. He would probably recommend it sometimes, but Polybase is an option. I did mention it in passing, and that is a technology in SQL Server 2019 and later. You don't want to use it pre 2019 because there's extremely limited capabilities with it. But 2019 and later, and it allows you to query external data as though it were local. So, similar to linked servers in that regard, it has its own advantages and disadvantages. If you have relatively limited numbers of remote views for your data, then Polybase could work pretty well, because you would create an external table that would essentially be a reference to a view in another instance, or a SQL Server instance, or it could be an Oracle or a few other places. And you could take that data and then uh, write it into your own staging table in the warehouse and get back to transformation in there. So again, these are looking more at ways if you wanted to reduce the amount of code that you were writing in small to moderate size systems. I would not use this for a data warehouse where you're regularly moving dozens of terabytes, or where you have hundreds of thousands of records coming in every minute and you constantly need to get massive updates. In that scenario, Polybase is probably not going to be a good answer. And you're obviously dealing with a much larger problem at that point. But for small, moderate scenarios where, we're talking your tables have hundreds of thousands to millions of rows, and or you can, on the remote side, on the source system side, very finely get down to, these are the records that we need to retrieve, and that you have appropriate indexing, and that you're able to collect that information pretty effectively, then yeah, it could be a solution. Magical solution involving JSON data types in SQL Server 2022. No, JSON parsing in SQL Server is pretty good. I mean, I will say, I have used it again in small data load scenarios. It works fine. Where small is tens to hundreds of thousands of rows. I would not want to rely on it for a very large scale solution. Again, if we're talking millions of rows coming out of JSON, uh, would not want to try to parse that. I think that would be overkill for that engine. It would not work very effectively. But if you're loading up a small number of records, especially if it's a small number of records once a day, then if your data comes in JSON format, okay, it's doable. But I would not try to transfer out JSON data. If your source system is a relational database, I would not spend the time writing out JSON just to read it back into another relational database system. that I think would not be a great answer. So that's about what I've got. Um, I know I threw a bunch of things out there, but quickly summarizing it, do as much processing as you can get away with in your warehouse because that's probably where you're going to have the excess compute. Work on tuning those processing techniques. So that could involve adding some indexes to staging tables. It could involve reviewing queries and ensuring that you are following efficient paths in retrieving data from your source system, appropriate indexing there. Uh, if you have things like large memory grants, that might indicate overly complex queries for the source system. You may want to break that out a little bit. Um, Try to save some of that complexity for the warehouse. If if it seems like your warehouse queries are uh, showing excessive memory grants, again, maybe having a stored procedure to load your data and breaking that out into smaller segments of operation could help potentially. Um, Having good indexes on your staging tables generally will help. For implicit conversion problems, make sure that your data types are correct. So if the data types that you're trying to join on are not the same in your staging tables, that'd be something to fix immediately. And if you're retrieving that data from a relational warehouse system, or excuse me, a relational database system and OLTP system, you can cast that data. Like if you need to change it from an int to a big int, cast that in the select query. So those would be the first steps. And if you needed to go further, then yes, you can use custom application code in the language of choice, .NET, Python, Java, whatever. Go if you wanted to do that. I know that there is a driver for SQL Server in Go and for other stuff, and you can transform in that code. You can transform on your application servers. Some of those transformations can be cheaper to do in your code, but at some point, if you're talking about large data sets, you're probably spending a lot of time and compute effort transforming and doing things less optimally than what the very well optimized database product does to do those same transformations. So there comes a point when I do recommend take advantage of the product that you're paying a lot of money for. And I know that that does go feel a little contrary to a lot of the advice of, well, offload as much as you can from the database because the database is really expensive. But, to Mike's point, unless you're talking about actively reducing the number of cores and changing the licensing, that license or if you're at 100% compute, if you're at like 75% sustained load on your server, if you're not there, if your sustained load is 30%, I'm personally going to say that licensing is fixed cost. Just uh, work with the product that works really well at its job and where you
Yeah.
have overhead. If you don't have any overhead, if you are near the edge, then first try to optimize. Spend some time there because most likely there are avenues for quality improvement within existing processes that will free up some of the processing power. And once you've gotten to that point where there aren't many advantageous improvements, then look at, well, what can I do in external code? So that would probably my recommended hierarchy of actions to take on that in that regard. So hopefully that's helpful. And if you want to follow up offline, or if you want to drop any additional questions in chat, you're absolutely welcome to. But hopefully that gets you somewhere on your way.
So on that topic, I really have to use Peacock more because I pay for it and I don't really watch it very much.
No, no, there's nothing worth watching on Peacock. Those NFL games, you can find elsewhere. I'm not going to say
No,
where.
no, no. I do stand up comedy and stuff, so I watch SNL like a freak. So, yeah. But I don't watch any. Well, I did watch Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys from back in the day. Like you can watch some of the old shows, which is kind of fun. Monk and other things.
Monk was a good show. I enjoyed that one. All right. Awesome info. Thanks. Excellent. Well, great. I'm glad you enjoyed. And hopefully that helps get you somewhere on your way. Okay. The next topic actually comes from Mike. So I'm going to share my screen because this is about something called the qualify clause. And the qualify clause is available in Teradata and also in Snowflake. And Mike was asking, well, hey, what? Wow, that entire ETL talk, we barely got off topic. I know. It's like I planned that or something.
I know.
Now, what I don't like, one thing that I will point out is I'm trying a new chat system. So I'm not a big fan of the white on white here. I'm gonna maybe have to change that after the show. Try to increase the shadow on the text a little bit, but I'll deal with that. I'll deal with that separately. But the qualify clause, this is something Mike was asking about because he wanted to know, well, hey, is there a SQL Server equivalent? How does this work? And qualify, in case you're not familiar with it, it is not a part of the ANSI standard. So that's part of why you have to go to Teradata or Snowflake to get it. So no SQL Server has qualify. No version of Oracle has qualify. I'm pretty sure Postgres, MySQL, they don't have qualify. I'm pretty sure DB2 does not have qualify, and I was positive I was going to make a joke about DB2, but I decided to be kind today by recommending that nobody ever use DB2. That is my kindness. Do not use DB2. Okay, so what does qualify do? Well, let me scroll down just a little bit because as I
I do
recall,
have.
there are some examples and oh, good. Examples using the rank function in a qualify clause. So here we've got a query. We've got item ID, sum price, rank, and this is a window function. We know it's a window function because it is a function followed by the over clause. Inside the over clause, we're ordering it by sum price descending. So I'm getting the ranked price from item ID, sum of sales, group by item ID as T1. We are qualifying the rank being less than 100. What this would say is give me all of the records, their item ID, their sum price, and that ranking, such that the ranking is less than or equal to 100. Or I could use
You would have to
quantiles. Go ahead, Mike.
keep going. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I was thinking out loud. You keep going, and I'll follow up if I.
sure. So here I've got items, profits, quantiles. So the quantile is not an a window function. It is just a regular analytic function. So break it out into 100% profit into the 100%, and we say qualify percentile equals 99. So this is the 99th percentile uh, of data, and technically, I guess it goes from 0 to 99, so it's the bottom. So this would be a case where I say only give me the bottom set. Essentially, what we're doing is we are querying data, we are applying some sort of analytic function to it, and we want to say the equivalent of where this percentile is equal to 99, or where the rank is less than or equal to 100, where the row number is equal to 1. Qualify looks a lot like having. It is a bit different.
Yes.
Having is, and actually they call it out a little bit up here, where group by and qualify. Okay, so let's go through the steps, and I'll explain where having fits in because it actually doesn't show up in this explanation. But database evaluates the where condition. So we first perform filters. If I scroll down a little bit, this first one does not have a filter. And this one technically doesn't have a filter either because this is in a subquery. So we would have a filter in the where clause. Then we would group by our items using the group by clause. Then, if we have a filter on the group, we would say having, like having the count star greater than
Count
50.
greater, yeah, correct, yeah.
And something like a count or a sum or an average, you can put into the having clause, and it will work. But for functions that do not group, such as window functions, any sort of window function is not a grouping function. You don't need a group by clause for that function to operate. And thus,
Right.
they don't fit into having. You can't filter on a having. So instead, qualify is on analytical functions. So in that sense, it is a lot like a having. It's sort of like a having for things that do not group, but are just regular analytic functions. And so then the question becomes, how do I do this in SQL Server? And let me let me go ahead and drop in the links that I'm using here, because so select from the query, then apply a where to that. Sort of, yes. Yes. So the equivalent to this is actually really simple. We if you're using window functions, you already know how to do this. Select star from where, select here a, where a dot blah equals 99. Exactly. So here's an example: employee name, employee number from a table. Qualify row number over partition by name, order by EMPNR. Descending is equal to 1. And there are two ways to solve this. So you want to get basically per name, what is the biggest employee number, whatever that employee number represents. So I want to get just the biggest number. And what we would do in T-SQL, common table expression, that is absolutely one of the two options. We would
Yes.
obviously we don't have a qualify, so we would say like with records as select employee name, employee number, row number over partition by employee name, order by employee number descending as row num from table, close parens, select star from records where row num equals 1. Works perfectly fine. Uh, there actually is a second answer as well, which is pretty neat. And that is order by with a top one with ties. So you could say
With top,
select
yep,
top one with ties, employee name and number, order by row number over partition by employee name, order by employee NR descending. And uh, Lucas does mention, hey, performance may actually be a little bit worse than a solution using the subquery. So it's probably not a great answer, but is a really neat answer, because it takes a little while to think about this, because hey, I'm only getting the top one, but I need to get one per employee. But we are ordering it by row number, and row number is going to give us a unique ascending number per partition. So we'll get one of them per employee name. Or we'll reset per employee. We'll get one instance of record one per employee name, and we'll show all of those. So for the uh, top in with ties, actually works pretty well. But the other way, this is what I was talking about. This is a subquery version. Common table expression would work exactly the same and would still give you that result. So qualify will work just fine. Um, it's just there's no qualify operator in T-SQL. We have to do a bit of extra work to get it going. Which makes me think, hey, that actually would be kind of neat to have in SQL Server 2020 whatever. It's probably not showing up in 2025, but it'd be kind of neat to have in a future version of SQL Server.
yeah. I mean, and the windowing clause has been awesome. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so many times we want the window result, and then we want to operate on that window result. And
exactly.
the I doubt we're going to get qualify, just because it's not ANSI standard.
Yeah.
And There is a very easy there's a very easy solution to
Work
this.
exactly, exactly. It's a it was something that came up with my buddy who worked my company, and he switches between Salesforce and Oracle, and I was venting about Oracle date formats, and he was like, "By the way, this qualify thing is pretty cool, and it's and it just saves a couple steps in Oracle." And he's like, not that you can't work around it with CTEs and other things, but just like it's been pretty cool for
Yeah,
them
although
to
I'm
use.
pretty sure it doesn't work in Oracle.
Well, qualify doesn't work in Oracle.
Yeah, but it does in
And
SQL.
that was why he was like, "Well, we use Snowflake most of the time, and then I have to go back to this old database that's FDA approved that is I don't know what you call it, like locked. Like it's kind of like it's a safety program where you can't change the database without doing change control and like getting approval from the FDA and stuff.
Right.
So he has to like go back to Oracle, but he's like in Snowflake all day, and
I
he's
just
like, "Oh, I
noticed
wish I had qualify."
I just noticed poor Adam. In April of 2015, Adam was using SQL Server 2008. I hope Adam's using something better than 2008 at this point. So,
Who's Adam? Do I
Adam
know
was the
Adam?
person who asked that question.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Because
Otherwise, I don't know who Adam was.
I'm so confused because the
Oh,
qualified guy is my one of my best buds, Adam. So I
oh,
was like, wait, it's double Adam.
I don't know him from Adam. And that was probably the last joke that I'm doing
Boom,
tonight.
boom, choom.
Speaking though, Mike, you mentioned you opened up the can of worms about Oracle and ranting. So I'm not even going to rant about this. Mike is going to rant about this. This is Mike's rant corner. You're on. You're on the air, caller.
What was my rant? Was it date
It
formats?
was date formats.
Yeah. So this is my rant was simply I was talking to. One of the things that I've been working on recently is there is a database that we have Server data and we have Oracle data, and then I'm going back and forth. And one of the things that has been happening is um, some of the information is kind of like based in like a time format, and it in the actual application, it's kind of like the date. There's a date, but the date is not important. It's really the time, right? So I wanted to strip the time. And there's one way to do that in Oracle, and then in SQL Server, it's a little bit different. It might be like um, time date parts,
Date
or
time parse. Yep.
yeah, and then there's different functions that you can use to like manipulate that data. But in Oracle, it's like it's so brutal that like, and then I'm the other thing that was happening with me is that I'm using multiple um, uh, clients. So I'm in dbeaver that's kind of like basic dbeaver that I haven't like really messed with at all. And then I have SSMS, and they they might have by default NLS format or not, or like they have tons of customizable features, but I'm just like I'm literally sitting here like, you got to be kidding me right now. Like I know how to do this. Like, so I'm like two char, two date, da 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 da. Year, month, month, month. Yeah, no, you can't do that. Invalid format. And I'm doing this forever. I figured it out, but like, man, I was just like, I went on to the TriPass board, and I was like, man, I hate this. It's not fun.
As one should. Those transformation functions in Oracle are the last time I really had to use them was what? Almost getting close on 20 years ago. It hasn't gotten better. So, I I remember disliking them. Oracle is real? Yes, but the spoon is not.
That's a callback Matrix. Probably you had.
Although I'm also pretty sure the Oracle wasn't real either. So I don't know. I don't know. Something we'll have to think about. Yeah, the way you have to do two char and two date and two char and two date and then two char it again, but you have to two date it, and then it gives you a weird error because you're supposed to use 27 digit numbering for year, month, day, hour, minute, second, nanosecond, uh, phase of the moon, and everything else. How dare you not use all of that? And I mean, I know I'm being a little obtuse here, but frankly, Oracle deserves it. So that's this sounds like
Well,
6 or 6.5 SQL
it's
Server here.
similar. It's similar to the qualified thing. It's kind of like I am, we, all of us are transition to SQL Server, and there's some great stuff. And I remember that's why I remember Kathy Hellenberger, like when she was talking about the date part and date from parts and date diff and some other things. Like I was like, oh, this is way. I was like, oh, this is way easier in like SQL Server. And I think there's some things in SQL Server that there are some things in Oracle that I think are kind of neat. Like you can create a table from a table, right? And I don't in SQL Server it's not quite so simple. You can't say create table as select table from. You have to do insert into or
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I mean, you can select into.
you can select into, right, but it's slightly
And
but like in Oracle you can be like create table, select star from this other table. Like
right.
you don't have to like define anything or whatever, and it will automatically pull in the data types, etc. Like that. So like I'm not saying like Oracle's all bad. Okay, sorry,
Yeah,
I don't want
and
to like rile everybody up. I'm saying that I was reminded of like one of the major headaches where I was like really digging deep on this very esoteric like date format that was entered during a surgery in a certain format that went all the way down to milliseconds, and it was like making me mad.
right. Right. Yeah, so in the SQL Server world, what's mildly annoying is that there is in fact create table as select, but Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pools and Microsoft Fabric. So they support it. The warehouse stuff supports it, but it is not available for on-premises SQL Server or Azure SQL Database.
Right.
And so there is the answer of um, select it into, which I mentioned and Anders mentioned here, and that will give you a structure. You can create an external table as a select in SQL Server 2022 if you're writing to Azure Blob Storage or S3 using Polybase. But yeah, you're not going to be able to create table as select unless you're using a Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool or a Microsoft Fabric warehouse. In which case, yeah, you absolutely can. So mild annoyance. Aren't you glad that Oracle can work with BC dates? Probably worth the pain. Well, look, SQL Server has explained to me that the beginning of time was January 1st of 1900. So nothing happened before then. We don't need any dates before that. Date time goes back to 1762. Eh, nothing was worth it
I
before
don't. Before Feasel doesn't count.
then. um, and, on our 32-bit systems, it's all going to end in 2038 anyhow. So we're fine. Everything's fine. Don't panic. Everything's
Well,
fine.
in 2032 we're gonna get hit by a comet. So where you go?
Well, great. Now I don't have to worry about those 32-bit systems. We've got a big data lake that goes way back, and yeah, there are perfectly legitimate reasons to have dates going back that far. Um, I used to work with medical records where we had stuff going back to late 1800s, early 1900s, and any sort of birth certificate that the State Department of Health had, they had to maintain that for the entirety of a person's life plus some number of years. So
Right.
yeah, you can have data that goes. All my jokes are being taken as serious comments. Oh no, I know it's rough living that
No,
life,
no, yeah, no. I have
but it is
learned.
real.
I know we're over time, so I would say like working at this big health institution, we would think like, oh, this person can't possibly have 17 diagnoses or 19 medications or 37 medications, and like we find some situations where it actually does happen, and so we all get a little bit of an ounce of prevention where so if we look at like flow sheets for example, there could be dates from 1914 or could be dates from 2029, like they might be just entered wrong because there isn't like data formatting, so we're careful about that because it can really bite you. You think like, well, the system wouldn't allow that, right? Like, but it might be a free text field. Like, you don't know because there are some tools within the system that can be built by the clients and not by like IT, right? Like they're flexible data structures. So you can enter any date you want, and sometimes the dates are 2039, and
Right.
so we want to say like parameters in place to deal with that. Anyway, I know we're late.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we are thankfully out of time. So we're wrapping it up for tonight. Remember, tomorrow we have our TriPass Advanced DBA group, meetup.com/TriPass. I am currently pulling it up to get the details of the session. This is troubleshooting Azure SQL and SQL Server using extended events. So this is Javier Villegas, who is going to talk to us about the topic, and should be a good one. So we'll have Javier tomorrow. Um, Next week in person is moving from SQL Server to Azure Databricks. Chris Voss, local hero, is going to make a triumphant return. I remember him when he was this tall, type of thing. I do intend to embarrass him. Um, so that'll be fun. And then for our data science business intelligence group, Dennis Torres is talking about Azure SQL vector support in AI scenarios. So that'll be the fourth Tuesday of the month. So, we've got a lot going on this month. Three meetings. There will be one more episode of Shop Talk in a couple of weeks, maybe, because actually that's MVP Summit. So I may or may
Mm.
not be able to be there to host it. But regardless, we will have those three meetings. Hopefully, we'll see you there. But until we do see each other in some future episode of Shop Talk or at a TriPass meeting or wandering around on the streets getting cut off in traffic, take care.